I couldn't help but question how as many as 25 million pilgrims walked to Karbala over the course of 40 days in mourning for a man who died 1400 years ago, and it wasn't worthy of global attention. I also thought if this many people were walking and safe, then I would have to trust I would too. As I researched Arbaen from home, the only story I could see was coverage from a suicide bombing in 2016, and even now, Arbaen is almost unreported in the West. And so there I was, at Najaf Airport, with a team of Iranian and Iraqi filmmakers preparing to make a documentary on Arbaen to capture the attention of a wider non-Muslim audience. For 3 weeks, we walked Arbaen via the quiet pathways in Hilla, along the Euphrates River, and towards the heart of Karbala via what pilgrims fondly call the Highway of Love. I was moved by the compassion I personally encountered, and also between pilgrim to pilgrim, many of whom had flown from the US and Asia and UK. I was surprised to meet a woman who worked for HSBC in London, and she explained to me that the last thing her office workers said to her before leaving for this spiritual journey was, "Don't die." Instead, we found ourselves in Hilla, discussing the lack of independent coffee shops in London, while meandering our way through these date palm forests towards our accommodation for the night. I've been informed that if you stay in the men's mokebs, you'll experience a strong symphony of snoring. But I can tell you in the women's mokebs, you have to be prepared for toddlers poking you awake and the sound of newborn babies crying. And in my case, I had aunties offering me food, readjusting my hijab, and asking me 20 times a day if I was married. Everyone was there for the same reason, to pay respects to Imam Husain. And yet we were all on different journeys. While I'm not Muslim, I found the message of Arbaen at an enormously transitional point in my life. And I found many pilgrims had decided to walk Arbaen after losing a loved one or fleeing conflict, those who had waited much of their life to be there in their 80s and 90s. And I also learned that in 2017 and 2018, more women than men walked Arbaen. When we reached Imam Husain's shrine the day before Arbaen, I stood on a rooftop looking out at a stream of pilgrims arriving in the city, and at my colleagues knelt on the floor weeping in the presence of Imam Husain's shrine. I felt overwhelmed and confused. How could up to 25 million people walk in peace every year and no one know about it? How could they mourn for Husain as if he had just died that day? And how could one man unify so many people in one place, and yet so few globally know about it? This is something I continue to reflect on in Iraq as we finish filming, and when I returned back to the UK. I spent 2018 deeply frustrated by the contrast between my experiences and what the British media spouted. 2 weeks before Arbaen in 2018, I contacted my friend Farzan, and I asked if we could walk it again. This time, we were without a documentary film crew. I wasn't sharing a polished film, but rather videos of everyday encounters shot on iPhone with pilgrims and locals as we shared food and tea, experiences and company. While Arbaen is no doubt a time of deep mourning, there is so much joy to be found too. In the most sensitive and raw of times, we can, as people, be softer than ever, and that is certainly the case for Arbaen. Social media is a tool that's neglected, but here I'd found a space to show people how I experienced Iraq and how peaceful Islam is. It wasn't enough to tell people, I had to show them, and Instagram became that medium. On the day of Arbaen, I was presented with a press card and invited alongside multiple local and international journalists, albeit all male, to photograph from the roof of Imam Husain's shrine. The videos I shared subsequently went viral, which is the reason why I'm standing here today, and with that, a tide of positive and negative feedback. But what these videos confirmed was that positive, non-sensationalized news about human connection could go viral, that there was a want and a need for storytelling from the Middle East and Muslims that wasn't just conflict and terrorism. Compelled by the story of Husain, since 2018, I've documented Muslim communities in the US and UK, Kashmir and Uttar Pradesh in India, Afghanistan, Iran, Kurdistan region of Iraq, and Lebanon to show another reality of life in these countries and the experiences of those who live there. I find it immensely problematic that it required a non-Muslim white woman to bring attention to the world's largest pilgrimage. It exacerbated the privilege that I held, and I realized how much more inclined people were to listen to me than Muslims. There are steps white people can make, and the first is to recognize our privilege. Staying out of politics and not lending our support as allies to Muslims is privilege in action. The color of my skin and religion will likely not make me a target of bigotry, attacks, deportation, or genocide. When the men at Heathrow Immigration asked me if I was safe, I told them very simply that the very reason they wanted to interview me was the very reason I had gone to Iraq, to show people it's not what they think it is. I opened my laptop and I showed them my photographs. I believe they're being exhibited somewhere in this building. And I showed them these pictures from the pilgrimage. They started to ask me about Shia Islam and what Iraq was like. And in that moment, 3 non-Muslim male police officers apologized for making the assumption that I was in danger simply because I'd been in Iraq. I left that room feeling like I had, in the briefest of moments, used my privilege to provide the men with the tools to question. They wanted to know, they just didn't know what to ask. Many of us don't have the courage to ask the questions, and many of us will bypass this requirement and come to our own conclusions about people and communities. And likewise, it isn't the responsibility of Muslims to educate non-Muslims. But I'm hopeful that those with privilege, like myself, can not only support Muslims, but also encourage non-Muslims to engage in activism. Journalism has the power to bring about change, to shift perspective, to empower. It always has, and it always will. And the choice is how we use it. We must collectively stand up on the right side of history, to never be silent bystanders, and to stand up against injustice, just as Imam Husain did 1400 years ago. There's no more important message in my life to share than this. And thank you, Imam Husain Summit, for inviting me here today.